Welcome to the HAYVN Hubcast, a place to learn what business leaders, owners, and professionals are doing to navigate and grow in today's market. Hear from industry experts on everything from marketing, leadership, financing, and more. Brought to you by HAYVN, a co-working space where you can connect, create, and get stuff done.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the HAYVN Hubcast. I am here today talking book writing, book agenting, best-selling novelist with Betsy Lerner. Betsy, welcome to the HAYVN Hubcast.
Thank you so much.
Betsy is sort of in the HAYVN Hubcast world because she is going to be one of our Her Story conversationalists in October. And we just thought it would be great to have a kind of pre-chat with you, Betsy, and kind of dive into a preview of your Her Story today.
Yes, I love the dress rehearsal.
Exactly. So, Betsy, for those of you who are familiar, some people know you as an agent. Some people know you as a writer. Some people know you as a nonfiction writer. Some people know you as a novelist, author of bestselling Shred Sisters, which is also coming out in paperback. And you're also a sister and a mother. So that's a lot of hats to wear, and would love to. And I didn't even mention that you're a TikTok star as well. So, but as we try and connect all those dots today, I would love to go back and say, I know that let's go back to your 20s where I know you've got many diaries, but where were you in terms of your mindset of like, what did Betsy want to be when she grows up? What was her career trajectory?
I started writing, I think when I was around 8 or 9 years old. I'd read Diary of a Young Girl, Anne Frank's diary, and I started keeping diaries. But my writing was always something that was very private, and I didn't share writing with anyone. And I never imagined that I would grow up and be a writer and have books. That just seemed like something completely out of reach for me. I mean, I went to school too. I was an English major. I actually started in film school. My dream was always to be a screenwriter, I loved movies, probably even more than books when I was younger. And I got kicked out of film school, so I became an English major. And I did this sort of obvious going into publishing. And the writing was something I always did sort of on the side or secretly. I did take some poetry classes. I did submit some poems from time to time. And I unbelievably won a contest in college and one in high school. So those were like little pieces of encouragement. But I was always too pragmatic to imagine that I could be a writer.
But interesting that you like the movies better than the books because there's still the storytelling that goes on, but it also seems so fictional and fantastic and far away versus, if I'm hearing you correctly say, the personalness or the personal nature of writing what you know to be the case. Back in the day when you sort of went into publishing, it was a very different field than it is now. There were the big houses and there were career paths, right? Like are you on the editorial side? Or are you on the sales and marketing side? How did you kind of crack into that space? Because I have friends on the editorial side and they were paralegals back in the day before they sort of were able to give it a go. What did that look like for you?
It's a very funny story. When I graduated college, I ran around town taking typing tests at all the publishing companies. This is literally pre-computer. That's, how old I am. These were on Selectrix. I couldn't type fast enough. And so I wound up getting a job at Morgan Stanley. I was the corporate file communications, meaning I pulled fiche all day, microfiche. And I did that for 2 years. And they were probably the 2 worst years of my life. I was miserable, but I got into this poetry workshop and I found a mentor in the teacher who was Jory Graham, and she helped me put together a portfolio of poems. I applied to graduate school. I got in, and while there at Columbia, they had an internship program at Simon & Schuster.
Nice.
Which I won. And as a result, I didn't have to take a typing test. I got shoehorned into this Simon & Schuster internship program, and I got to rotate in all the different departments, which was a fantastic education, sales, marketing, publicity, but I really wanted editorial. And when a permanent spot opened up on editorial row, I applied for it, and I worked with a wonderful legacy nonfiction editor, and that's how I got my start in publishing. And I took to it very quickly because I loved working with writers. I loved writing. I also was too afraid to be a writer, as I've mentioned. So it was a great writer adjacent job.
I'm unpacking sort of what your life looked like so the graduate program was going on simultaneously as you were, or the internship program was in the summer in between, or were you trying to juggle all this at the same time? And again, listeners, remember, this is before computers. This is before computers. So reading and editing looks a whole lot different than it does now.
Yes. It would definitely manuscript pages, blue pencils, which I still use. But no, when I was in graduate school, I actually had a part-time job at a literary agency. I think that's also how I started to get the bug. And then the internship was actually after graduation. So it was a full-time paid position. And it was at Simon & Schuster.
And they probably appreciated that you had the agency experience, even if it was at a entry-level kind of space, that you've seen both sides of what goes on.
I really don't think I was appreciated in any capacity. I was lower than the editorial assistant. I was also sort of an amoeba myself. I did not have a ton of confidence. I did not speak up very much, but I was also a sponge.
Okay.
I wanted to learn, and I learned. And I learned from some of the greats. These are the days when publishing was really a big deal, and the people who ran the departments were sort of
celebrities.
Yeah, they were. There were some who were celebrities, and I worked with some of them, and it was fantastic education.
Yeah. They were at Michael's having lunch, just like all the movie stars. Betsy, for listeners who, I just like to peel back, we talked about this before, familiar with the publishing industry. I think a lot of people who just say, "Oh, I love books," and then somehow books are magically made, right? And you just talked about and we started at Simon & Schuster, there are all these different departments. There's the editorial side, there's the sales and marketing side, then there's the publicity, there's a design. And that's once a book makes it to the publishing. You talked about agencies. Would you mind, I know it's going to sound like a primer for people, but the path to getting a book published used to be more linear than it is, but it's never been completely linear. But there's some key players that typically go in there. And I feel like you've actually been one of those players in your career. Would you mind just sharing with listeners sort of what either typically happens now or how it used to happen, just to give a sort of framework, because I feel like it's so fascinating that you've worked in all these, that you've covered all these parts.
Do you mean how do you get your book published?
Exactly. That sort of, I'm a writer. Oh, do you have an agent? Or I have a story to tell. Right.
Yeah. The first step is getting an agent. And that's a very tough code to crack often, unless you have really exemplary credentials and you've built up either a huge social platform, or you have a very distinguished career, or you have a lot of media access. So a lot of publishers these days really want authors to come with all that. For fiction, it's a little different, but it's still very, very helpful if you have a prestigious MFA or some famous writers recommending you, or you're published in the New Yorker or other sort of high quality venues. It is difficult to break in, and probably more difficult than ever. So but I don't want to sound too negative. There's always sort of more than one way to skin a cat, but you really also today, which you didn't have back when I started, you do have this magical thing called the internet, and you can do a lot of research and find out about a lot of agents, how they work, what their requirements are for submissions. You can learn a lot about how to write a query letter, how to put a manuscript together. You can find a freelance editor. You can go to workshops. You can take classes. There's a lot out there to educate yourself and prepare yourself for reaching out to agents and then becoming an author.
Yes. And again, people spend sometimes 2 to 3 days helping writers understand this process. So it can't all be covered in a few minutes. But Betsy, you yourself, at what point in your trajectory, sort of, you were working in publishing, you're on the editorial side. At what point does one move from being on the publishing side and the editorial side to saying, hey, this agenting thing, I can do it? Is it I'm tired of the editing process, or is it you've developed enough relationships? What was it for you that sort of said, wait, I can do this agent thing and I feel better aligned with that?
Yeah, most agents were fired from their publishing jobs, and that's when they started. To tell you the truth, publishing has become a game of musical chairs. It used to be that people moved around from house to house, but now usually some chairs are eliminated. And so people get pushed out of the editorial, sadly, and many do become agents. I jumped ship before I was never fired, I'm proud to say, but I worked for a company, and many back then had no flex time. And I already was a workaholic. You could have trusted me to work on the moon if I needed to. I was so devoted. But I had a child. I was like 31, and they wouldn't even let me work at home for a half a day. And at the same time, my former boss and the editor-in-chief was at Doubleday at the time, had become an agent, and he kept asking me to come and join. And I finally was so fed up with this lack of flex time that he came to me again and he said, okay, if you don't want to come, who should I call? And I said, maybe we should talk. And he asked me what I wanted. And I said, really, all I want is flexibility. And he said, no problem. Now, of course, since COVID, everybody's working remotely. And I see young women editors having so much more flexibility. And I'm so happy for them. But I did not come of age when that was a possibility. So when I had this promise of flexibility, and the other reason I knew I could become an agent is that when I was an editor, I did not just acquire projects that agents sent me. I went after a lot of people on my own and brought in a number of clients, a number of authors, unagented. And they all came with me. And I sort of knew that they would. Because they wanted to maintain our editorial relationship. We'd already developed a lot of trust. And so right out of the gate, I probably had a half a dozen clients.
Awesome.
And I was also very entrepreneurial. I always had ideas. I always went after people who I thought were charismatic, who could write, who had some message that was unique. And yeah, I do that to this day.
We're going to tease that up in just a second in terms of one of your current projects. But I think, again, understanding that process and back, I don't want to say back in the day, but that was before platform. I mean, when you started out, it was before writers or personalities or characters were required to have a platform. So they might have. It didn't look like the social media platform they have now. But to your point, you seeing that there's an interesting story there, or there's more that the world needs to know, and helping that bring their story to life was critical. And is that a matter of just you sort of pick up the phone and say, hey, what does that pitch look like on the other side? I know what the pitch looks like for writers looking for agents, but what does an agent's pitch to a potential writer or client look like?
Yeah, well, first I'll tell you my secret for finding people. Again, pre-internet, there used to be these magazine stores in New York City that would have literally 200 or 300 magazines in these really tall racks. And I would spend hours in there looking at magazines and finding people who wrote interesting articles, who were also even better practitioners themselves. It was there I found this little magazine called Stardate, and I found these little cartoons by this person who called himself Merlin, who answered all these questions about the cosmos. Well, they were written by this guy called Neil deGrasse Tyson, who at that point was just getting his postdoc and was hardly famous.
Right.
But I thought the cartoons were so adorable, and I reached out to him. I wrote a physical letter, which is what you did, and asked him, would you want to put these cartoons together in a book? And that became the beginning of our now, I think, 30-year working relationship.
Wow. Well, I was about to say, can you tell us one of your funny stories? But there you go. That is amazing. Is it harder or easier to discover those new clients, Betsy, or are you at a different sort of stage in your career in terms of that discovery?
Well, now, Nancy, I will give all your listeners a secret. I have found incredible people on TikTok.
Oh, fancy. I mean, fantastic.
Yeah, people who are really amazing communicators, who have a body of work they are sharing or an area of expertise. And they've already proved that they have sometimes hundreds of thousands of followers. But more than that, they're putting out content on a daily basis. They have tremendous expertise. They usually have some kind of charisma. Otherwise, why would people watch them? And often they have a Substack, so I can go over there and check out, can they actually string some sentences together in addition to just being terrific camera communicators. So yeah, I mean, there are talented people everywhere, and it's really just a matter of being super curious and entrepreneurial. And obviously now I have so much experience under my belt that I can really identify who I think could take off.
But I mean, that's an aha for me. And I think for some people who say, well, if people are really popular on social media, I'm going to say, one tends to sort of say, well, if they've got all that time to be on social media, they can't have time to do anything else or have anything else to say. Or to your point, are they really writers and everything else? But I love learning about your journey on the BookTok, right? In terms of, it's just actually been a place for people to share their stories and in a private way and get the word out without having to be discovered or pitching or a gazillion agents. So I love that you're modeling a different type of social media experience than I think the world in general has with when you hear TikTok star, right?
Yeah, people are pretty snobbish about TikTok. They turn their nose down at it, especially a lot of people in publishing, and certainly a lot of grown-ups think that it's just kids dancing and whatnot. But there are a lot of very serious people on TikTok. I watch a lot of STEM talk. TikTok is a vast ocean with many streams. And one is STEM talk, science, technology, engineering, and math. And there are very serious scientists and graduate students on there sharing about their work. They're incredible. There are all sorts of business people and entrepreneurs. I mean, there's really everything once you sort of find it. And if you start to communicate within any TikTok community, for me, it's mostly the BookTok community because that's my world. But no, you shouldn't count out TikTok. It's really not just kittens, though the kittens are very cute.
Well, I feel like we've come into TikTok from one side, but the reason you've gotten to know TikTok is you yourself have taken to using it as a platform for your voice and sort of sharing as I think you do. Can you tell us about your experience? Like what made you sort of dive into the world of TikTok and test it? Was it for publicity? Did somebody dare you? What was the initial sort of like dip your toe into the TikTok world?
Well, it was really as a literary agent, as a publishing professional, people started to say the only thing that moves the needle is TikTok. I think this is during COVID, the whole Colleen Hoover phenomenon, but then also BookTok started to really take off where all these kids, young people were talking about the books they love to read. And it was a lot more than just romantasy. They're a very serious group of readers who love literary fiction and who even love classics and very little nonfiction, I will say. It is mostly fiction. But I just wanted to get to know the world to see what, quote unquote, moved the needle in terms of selling to publishers. And once I got on, I went right down the rabbit hole because I thought some of these influencers, the way they talked about books, it was so passionate. And I thought this is actually going to save publishing. This is a very serious group of a younger generation who are loving books and sharing books and in many cases making books take off. So that's how I started. And then I got a little curious about maybe making some of my own content. I blogged for 10 years, so I'm sort of used to trying to communicate through the internet. And I started experimenting with some silly little videos when a good friend who's really a TikTok coach and amazing influencer told me that I had to get on camera if I wanted to get any following at all. And I refused. And then a couple months later, she said, "Are you getting anywhere?" No, I still had about 500 followers. And she said, "Are you ready to get on camera?" And she said, "Betsy, you have to think of it." And this is what I would tell everybody. You have to think of it as your own personal TV channel. And you have to be on every day. You have to post every day. And you have to have a lane, something that you do that people will recognize and like and come back to. You can't be all pell-mell the way I had been. And I thought then, oh, I've got all these diaries from my 20s. Maybe if I read a little bit from my diaries, people might be interested. And the first one I did went viral. So
Wow.
that was super encouraging. Now, only one goes viral a month now. Most of them are pretty.
Only one. Most people would like to have one viral one a lifetime. So one a month, you're allowed.
But yeah, so whenever one goes viral, then I get a bunch of new followers. But generally, it's a more modest offering. But I really have enjoyed it. I love connecting with these 20-somethings. I get lots of comments about my diaries are all about struggle. Being lonely, being lost, not knowing what my future would hold, not having a boyfriend, struggles with my family, breakups with friends. And so what I found is that these things are universal and people, especially in their 20s, really relate. And I have revisited these diaries, which has been very meaningful to me, also just personally. So it's a project, it's not just going on TikTok.
No.
It's bigger than that for me.
But that first leap of getting in front of the camera, I think is the one that sort of blogging is one thing, but as you said, getting in front of the camera is another. I'm trying to tease out in my brain this timeline of you're on TikTok, you've already written. We've leapt ahead, but you've already written 3 nonfiction books. When did the idea for the Shred Sisters come? Is there any relationship to the diaries? I'm trying to connect all these dots in terms of that timeline for you. Or again, was there an aha moment of, I've got a nonfiction in me, or I spent enough time with others in nonfiction, I've got to give it a go. What was that light bulb for you of going in that direction?
Yeah, a number of things came together at once. First, I had written a nonfiction book as a co-writer with Temple Grandin. He's a very famous autistic animal scientist. And we had done a book called Visual Thinking, and it required hundreds of footnotes and hundreds of reading abstracts. And it was the biggest project I'd ever done to date. And it was very complex. And when it was done, I said, never again.
I.e., nonfiction was never going to be part of your life anymore. Forget it.
Nothing that required that much research. It was very intense. And I mean, it was also, I'm so proud of that book. And it did hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I've worked with Temple for 30 years. But all that aside, when that was finished, I just didn't think I was going to write again for quite a while. And it was still COVID. And I was in a little pod with my family up in Vermont. And I just opened my computer and I wrote what turned out to be the first line of the book. Here are the ways I could start this story. So I was just thinking out loud, writing. But then I just kept going. It just sort of took on a life of its own. And the book came to me very quickly. I wrote it over 7 months.
Wow.
And I did have to revise it for almost 2 years. So you pay for it one way or the other. But at that time, I'd come through a series of really tragic losses. My niece and nephew, Ruby and Hart Campbell, were killed by a drunk driver.
I'm so sorry.
My mom died, and my best friend took his life. And I think that I was so overwhelmed by all of that, that the book, while it's not about any of those things, it is very much about loss and bonds and all of which I was going through because after the kids died, my two sisters and I really bonded in a way we never had before. I mean, we had to. We just lost our mother. The kids had died. We were so concerned about my sister who lost her children. And the three of us started working out together over Zoom. We were all siloed. Not over Zoom, I'm sorry, over FaceTime. We started doing these little workouts in the morning to get her up and keep our eyes on her. And we called it shredding, which is, a term for working out. We started calling ourselves the Shred Sisters.
I love this backstory.
So these are all the things that were going on in my life that I think fueled the writing of that book. I had not planned it. I had not dreamed of being a novelist. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I was really just writing my heart out. And when I came to the end, I thought, well, maybe I do have something here. And I shared it with my husband, and he really gave me a lot of notes. That was the first revision. It went through so many revisions, as it should. I mean, I wrote it fast and sloppy.
I mean, but that you did it. You started. I mean, again, we could spend another 6 hours of explaining what the revision and editing process of a book looks like. But at the time you were writing it as an escape, right? I mean, I think you also, it sounds like you didn't have the pressure of, I'm writing a book, I'm on deadline. You were using that very special writing time to just create. And it sounds like it was a release and an escape and a place to process information. I mean, process things.
Totally. And as you know, when you write nonfiction, you sell it on a proposal and you get a deadline, and there is a lot of pressure and eyes on you. And, you don't want to disappoint anyone. For me, writing this novel was sort of like when I wrote my poetry or when I was writing my screenplays. Nobody cared. Nobody was waiting for it. The world didn't need it. It was really just for me. And even now, as I write, I try to get back into that headspace where I just have to make myself happy, entertain myself, get lost in my little sandbox. That's really what you do, I think, in creative work. Painting, making music, whatever it is.
Then I have to go back to the business. Well, okay. So at this point, and then was TikTok after that? Did you have the confidence of okay, I have a right, I have a point of view, or what the diaries were? Were you writing the book simultaneously? Were you I'm just trying to figure out what a day in the life of Betsy Lerner looked like in 2022.
I think I started the TikToks after I finished the novel.
That feels like you might have had that injury. And then I have to sort of then ask, does an agent get an agent, or does the agent get to be her own agent? And what does that process feel like, putting yourself out there?
Yeah, no, you get an agent. You definitely do not want to operate on yourself.
Okay.
And you don't want to get the rejections thrown at your face. You want to filter through your agent. You definitely need a team. And I was very fortunate that I know all the agents, and the one that I most wanted to work with seemed very happy when he got my call. And
fantastic.
David Black is my agent. He's amazing. And yeah, I mean, you have to have a certain amount of guts to put yourself out there. All the editors who read my book knew me as an agent, and many of them rejected me, and I had to be able to still have relationships with them.
Right.
Take it well. But I mean, when you're an agent, you get a ton of rejections on behalf of your clients. For every book you sell, there were many rejections along the way. So I have a very thick skin. And I'd actually, if I could help anybody with this, who cares about no? You're just looking for yes. And if you get mired in the rejections and start thinking about them too deeply, I mean, some can be helpful, but usually, whether it's a guy, whether it's an editor, whether it's a job, if it's a no, just move on.
That is so much easier said than done for many people. So much. I mean, yeah, I could use that advice. Betsy, I could sit and we could chat for hours. So good thing we have October 9th to look forward to, where we can tease out more of this. In the meantime, if listeners want to learn more about you, your TikTok, your books, your agenting, what's the best place where they can learn more about you? And do you send people to sort of get started to know more about Betsy Lerner?
Well, if you really want to know about publishing and writing, I wrote a book called The Forest for the Trees. That was my first book. It's an editor's advice to writers. It's been in print for as long as almost 20 years now. So I think it's still relevant. And half of it is about what kind of writer are you and figuring out sort of why you write. And the second half is about how to get published. So that's one way.
And your TikTok handle.
Obviously, at Betsy Lerner, that you'll just hear about the diaries on that. And I did write 2 different memoirs, so that's all out there. There's a lot out there.
Okay. And Shred Sisters is out in hardcover, but the paperback's coming out at the beginning of September. So it should be coming out about the same time as this podcast goes live. So contact your local bookseller or wherever you go to get your books.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the plug.
No, of course. And for those of you in the area, please come see us on October 9th, if this is before October 9th, where Betsy and I will continue this conversation and get to have much deeper conversations on all of these fantastic topics. And you're just inspiring career, Betsy. And we haven't even talked about sisters yet. So we got to dive into the sisters as well. Betsy, thank you so much for your time today. Really looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too.
And that's another episode of the HAYVN Hubcast. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please make sure you're a subscriber and give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the HAYVN Hubcast, a place to learn what business leaders and owners are doing to navigate and grow in today's market. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. HAYVN is a co-working space and virtual community located in the heart of Fairfield County, Connecticut. HAYVN is a hub for business owners and professionals to connect, create, and get stuff done. Find out more about the HAYVN community online at hayvn.com. That's HAYVN.com. HAYVN Hubcast is produced by Sound Advice Strategies.